Welcome to our KuppingerCole webinar, Making IAM Agile and the Business Enabler. This webinar is supported by IC Consult, and the speakers today are Tim Hobbs, who is Microservices Evangelist at IC Consult, and me, Martin Kuppinger, I'm Principal Analyst at KuppingerCole Analyst. As this webinar says, hi Tim, as this webinar title already says, it is about making IAM Agile. And this will also be a lot about customization, orchestration, integration, and some somewhat more technical aspects at the end of the day, but also put into a broader context on what do we need to do to serve today's business needs. Before we start, some quick information about our upcoming European Identity Conference and some housekeeping, and then we'll directly dive into the subject of today's webinar. So next week, starting on Monday, we will run our European Identity and Cloud Conference 2021. This is a fully hybrid event, so you can participate on-site in Munich or you can participate online. There are different ways to participate depending on where you want to participate. Have a look at the website. It will be a very interesting event with 200 plus speakers, a lot of exhibitors on site, and with the virtual attendance, many sessions around everything which is relevant around identity, around decentralized identity, around cloud security and related themes. So don't miss this event. It's not too late to register. For this webinar itself, from a housekeeping perspective, we are doing a recording and we will provide the slide decks for download after the webinar. There will be a Q&A session by the end of the webinar, and feel free to enter questions at any time. The more questions we have, the more interesting the Q&A part of this webinar will be. And we will run a few polls during the webinar and discuss the results during the Q&A. So having said this, and without further ado, let's have a look at the agenda. So in the first part, I'll talk a little bit about the business impact of IAM and how to make IAM agile. Then in the second part, Tim Hobbs will talk about the benefits of a highly customizable identity management and how to make this work. So how to run this in a way that it doesn't bring you into problems with updates or when delivering sort of new code, etc. So how do you really make this work in a seamless manner, even in complex environments? And last but not least, there will be a Q&A session. As of that, we also will do a few polls. And so the first question I'd like to raise, in fact, there will be two polls. The first question is about your current IGA, as Identity Governance Administration tool, Provisioning Lifecycle Management Access Governance. Is this tool already based on a microservices architecture, so modular, or is it more a sort of a traditional RAS monolithic architecture? So where are you, modern microservices or traditional? Okay, I think we can close the poll. Thank you very much for participating. We will grab the results of the poll during our Q&A session, as we will do for the second poll, which I'll run before switching over to Tim. So when we look at this theme of why is identity management so important, why is the flexible identity management so important, then the point to start with is change. Business is under change. And I think the last 18, 20 months have really demonstrated that. So there were the longer changes like the digital business, the transformation towards it, the shift to cloud and other operating models, but there's also and a lot of other innovation, but we have also seen that there can be external factors which require businesses to change way faster than ever before. And in the context of the digital business, it also became obvious that we must think beyond the workforce identity management. We must make identity management more agile. We must do it differently. So identity management is definitely a bigger thing right now. It's about more than administration, regulatory compliance. And it evolved over the years from standard disciplines like administration to governance to consumer identity management, adaptive authentication. Is it the end of the story? No, I don't think so. It will become even bigger because we must, for instance, then support all these sort of complex workloads in multi-cloud, multi-hybrid environments. We must think about the identities of things and services and devices and relate them to the humans and make all this work. So at the end, I think the point is when we look at today's situation, then digital identity is very much at the heart of everything we do in digital business. I'm always a little careful with this term digital transformation because I don't think we are talking about a transformation. Transformation would be from A to B. It's more a journey. It's ongoing. So we need to continuously innovate to get better. And dealing with the digital identities of customers, of things, of devices is essential. On the other hand, we must enable the complexity of our IT to be managed. And when we look at today's situation, then we have new applications, we have new types of deployment models, we have DevOps and Agile IT, and we must secure all that, this dynamic environment. It's not that we say, okay, we set up a server and this takes us a couple of days or weeks, and then we configure everything around it, and this is stable for how long? It is, workloads are going up and down. It's continuous change, and we need to support this. We need to secure this, and it's about who or what, which identity can do what. It's about identity management. So we must do more. It's going beyond. And this is really the theme of digital transformation, where we have all these external impacts, like a fast-changing competition, competitors no one expected maybe a few years ago. Many German automotive vendors probably a couple of years ago didn't expect Tesla to become a real competitor. We have different types of partnerships. We have the volatile regulatory environments. We have everything is connected. We have, on the other hand, all the cyber attacks. We have a huge risk. And so we need to be more agile in our organization, more flexible, more innovative. And that means we need to do things different. We need to change the way we are doing manufacturing. Everything is connected in smart manufacturing. We need to change the way we interact with customers. We have the connected things and all the stuff, and everything is software in some way. So software is really a key play in that. That means we need to manage that. And digital identity, aside of several other technologies, is what makes this work. So we need an identity management that is more flexible to react, and which is also broader in its capabilities. I did many talks over the past years around also the sort of the bigger concepts like the identity fabric, etc. I'll touch it in a minute. But to me, it's very clear. It's way more than traditional user lifecycle management and identity provisioning. And even in these environments, like we have seen with all the work from home challenges, we need to be agile and flexible to support what is changing. So are you ready? Does your identity management cater to these needs? Is it that you're here and can say, okay, yes, cool, we are there. If not, then it's about modernization. Then you need to revisit your identity management and modernize where required. This isn't about throw it away and do it completely new. It is about looking at what are your future requirements? To which extent do you currently deliver to these? Do you need to change this? Do you need to improve that? Can you, for short or for longer, rely on what you have? Where are your biggest gaps? So really going consistently and very structured through this broader picture and thinking about what are the initiatives I need to take and how do they fit into a bigger picture, a picture that helps you to do what identity management needs to do. We call this an identity fabric. So how can you connect everyone and everything to every service? This is at the end what identity management needs to do. And you'll find at our website various talks where I go way deeper into the identity fabric theme than I can do in the short time I have for today's webinar. But at the end, what you need is you need to understand which capabilities you need. So the lifecycle management, the identity vetting or proofing, managing the relationships, federation, privileged access, having APIs ready to work against this. You also need to understand that this is at the bottom layer of this graphic. How do you support all your legacy? You will not just work in a new world with everything as a SaaS service, but you have legacy. How do you integrate with how do you utilize your existing identity management for doing so? On the other hand, you need to connect, and this is on the top of the graphic, how do you connect to all the new stuff, to the SaaS services, to the digital service, and how do you, upper left side of that center of the graphic, how do you enable digital services to consume identity services, to consume the service for registering users, for proving users, for authenticating users, for managing the identities, for privacy, all that stuff. This is what you need to do. So you need services and you need a modern architecture behind it. This is the technical aspect in the graphic to do so. So it is, from our perspective, it is essential to really today step back and say, okay, what will I need in future to identify your gaps, to create a picture, to have a model, and to plan from there step by step. So with that, the question is, how does this, so to speak, or what are some elements to really make this agile identity management work? One aspect is deployment. So we have this discussion with our customers very frequently about, is it a decision between on-premises only or cloud first, or is there more? Depending on the architecture and the solution you have, that might be also something where you have some flexibility. Because if you go for modern microservices architecture, container-based deployments, so Kubernetes and stuff, you can run it in different types of clouds. You can even shift it from A to B. So there are options, and you need to understand which options you have and which options you need to do so. But it also might be that you say, I go for a pure SaaS solution because this really suits my needs. A little bit less flexibility, but you shift some of your responsibility then to the provider, or you go to something in between. Tim will talk about service layers, which is really more the managed services approach with a lot of support from the service provider, but some more level of flexibility than pure play SaaS. But at the end, it's important to understand you need modern architectures because they are the foundation for flexibility in what you're doing. So it is really this technical architecture thing which helps you in flexible deployments and run it in the way you need it. So while you might argue traditionally, oh, I look mainly at the functionality, I believe that you could say this is a non-functional type of feature, but I believe that the architecture aspects and the way you customize, you integrate, you orchestrate are really key factors when picking a modern IAM tool in whichever area of identity and access management. So it's about customization, understanding the need and the role of customization. So are you scared about issues with your customizations when upgrading? You know, I think many of you probably have had this experience that whatever release 11 of the tool you have in place comes out and you learn that 65% of the customizations you have made over the past 10 years won't work well with release 11. And you end up in a huge project for upgrading. There are various reasons for that, and really many reasons why you might end up in that. You might just not have used the APIs which have been there. There might have been a gap in the number of APIs. There might be many other reasons for that. But for the future, you can do it better. And the foundation for that is, and this goes back to, I talked quickly about this identity APIs, the identity API layer, the interface where you work against when building, for instance, digital service, but also when customizing. So for customizing as in coding, do it in a segregation, well segregated. If you have a microservice architecture with many small services that expose interfaces, which are called APIs, then you can do your customizations in other microservices. So it means you have I've shown this a little larger just before, you have these APIs of the microservices, which are exposed via this identity API layer. And when you customize, you create another microservice. When you extend, when you orchestrate, for instance, with your IT service management, you create another microservice, which again might expose APIs, which then can be consumed by other services. But you keep it segregated as long as the APIs are stable, and you even might consider abstracting them so that you can change the underlying technology. As long as they are stable, you are in a quite good situation when it comes to upgrades, and you make it small, modular, well segregated, easy to maintain, easy to change, easy to improve. So utilize this potential of modern architectures for what you're doing here. And consider something, I'm not a big believer in the term, but it came up in the context in this discussion. Consider something which might be called GitOps. Probably there will appear other terms than GitOps maybe over time. What am I talking about? I'm talking about an approach which says, so the one part is DevOps. So you have your development, you roll it out, you put it into production. And for this entire environment, there's also an infrastructure management aspect. And if you bring in this and say, I have infrastructure as code, when developing everything, I also ensure that my entire infrastructure is set up appropriately, then that term GitOps can be used. As I've said, that might change over time. So it's an approach which is about develop, deploy, operate, and ensure that everything works well. And when I look at the reality, I've seen so many issues and incidents in identity management, real-world identity management, which just happened because there were changes and then some files were lost in updating, or some configurations went wrong, starting with firewall configurations, etc., in the infrastructure that this thing is running. Then it becomes clear if you can manage to combine that and to make it one consistent approach, which ensures that the infrastructure is always the one you expect to be the good. And this, from my perspective, then should go even one step further. So you might have listened to this conversation about cloud infrastructure entitlement management. It's about also securing that infrastructure. So how do you ensure that all these runtime environments, your clouds, your Kubernetes instances, all that stuff is well secured? So how do you ensure that? I think we need to go a little bit bigger into something we see as dynamic resource entitlement and access management. So go beyond the cloud aspect and go beyond just the infrastructure entitlements to secure everything, to secure for multi-cloud, multi-hybrid environments, who can do what in these environments, be it a human, be it a service on a resource, on a system, to integrate it, to automate it, to build it in policies. So think beyond that, really go have a look at not only the technology of identity management, but talk with your DevOps people, talk with your cloud people about how you can move to integrated, consistent approaches in that space. That will be what brings you success. And for success, there are many elements. It's not just technology, it's way more. So when you look at key success factors for identity management projects, this slide would deserve an entire webinar for sure. But it is not just the tools on the right-hand side. For tools, it's the implementation, the operating model, the way you run it. It's on the bottom, the peoples, the processes, the policies. It's the planning on the left side, budgeting, stakeholder, and it's requirements, understanding not only what you have in requirements, but also future requirements, potential regulatory requirements to ensure that your project is delivered on time, at budget and quality, and so on. And for IAM agility in specific, I see 8 factors you should have a look at, which are the organization. So you need an identity management department, a powerful one in place. You need to have the right team, internal, external, well educated. You need to invest in education because there are not so many specialists there. And then you need to model. This is the fabrics. Create your own fabrics picture or whatever you call it. Plan. So what is your roadmap? Where do you start? What do you need to do first? Go for the operations model. Ensure that this really runs. Build, customize in a way that is easy to handle with microservices flexibility. And automate everything. Automate based on policies. And that will help you then so this sort of built on your target operating model, and concepts, call it GitOps, call it differently, are what really makes this work. It's about integrating operations and customization. With that, I'm at the end of my part. I quickly want to launch a second poll, which has two options. So are your IAM tools primarily running on premises today, or as IDaaS as identity as a service? So let's launch the second poll. So just a mixed answer between somewhere, so half-half. Looking for your answers. Okay, then I think we can close it. So with that, it's about me to make Tim the presenter, and Tim Hobbs right now will talk about the benefits of customizable identity management and how to make this work, building on what I've said. So Tim, it's your choice.
Okay, super. So thanks, Martin, for the background there and the industry perspective on what we need, and that dovetails perfectly into what I want to talk about. So I want to talk about Agile IAM as a managed service. So in between the IDaaS and the on-premises options that are traditionally seen as the only two options. So if we look at how we solve these situations that Martin's talked about, many people think that IDaaS is one answer and something else is the other answer. Identity as a service or identity management as a service has a lot of advantages, definitely. So it's very reliable and brings you to market quickly, as long as you fit inside the use cases that are available. And the costs are very understandable and usually set up beforehand, so you can see what you're going to pay before you make any choices. And if you want to grow into new markets, then that's usually a very fast option to get into new markets or places that maybe you weren't operating before. But there are other trade-offs if you go for an identity as a service offering, and one of those is the flexibility that you have as a company. It's also the model of rollout or implementation of the identity as a service itself. And that's something that might be important to you, but based upon what Martin's just informed us, having a good process behind the scenes really dictates how effective your business is going to be using that service, or how quickly you can respond to new opportunities or new technologies or new standards or new methods that you want to use. So we think that having DevOps, GitOps process behind the delivery of the service is super important. The other aspect there, which many people think about, especially in the beginning stages of choosing how they want to have identity and access management deployed, is, am I going to be locked into one vendor or one implementation for a very long time? Am I going to need to revisit an entire project every couple of years? And that's something where the lock-in aspect is an important consideration. Are you locked into a particular approach or a particular technology or a particular vendor? And how easy is it or practical is it to move out of that situation? That can be not just a cost-driven decision, but that can also be a decision based on acquisitions or growth, whether that's growing out of your existing system or it's acquiring new companies that bring a different technology or approach, and you want to take advantage of it. So to look at this another way, or the reverse way, the traditional choice is, do I have a product that I implement? And in the earlier days, we would say, oh, is it a product on premises? Of course, it could be a product that you implement in a cloud or a hybrid situation. But the decision here is really, do you look for an identity and access management product that is extremely customizable and driven by a project to implement exactly what you want, in which case you have complexity to manage? Or do you move or look towards a identity as a service option, which is very straightforward to implement and usually quite fast, but also has constraints or limitations depending on how you look at it. It means it's very standardized. It means the use cases are very well defined. And this is so that the identity as a service provider can provide the service level agreements that you want. They can provide exactly the functionality that you're looking for. And if what you're looking for fits in IDaaS, then that might be the right option for you. If what you're looking for doesn't fit because your use cases are unique or more complex, then you need to look towards the other end of the spectrum, or towards a product-based solution, whether that's a product on premises or it's a product managed by somebody else. And that's where we think there's a real opportunity to have not just a product-based implementation, but take advantage of the methodologies of as a service technology and create this in a custom fit way. So our approach to this, which we have implemented for several large customers, primarily in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, is to start with a best of breed product. Some of those that you may know, tie this together with the infrastructure necessary to run those products, but supply this as code. So this calls back to what Martin was speaking about in the GitOps approach of using declarative methods or declarative ways to decide what you need to implement for infrastructure. Then do the same thing with configuration of the IAM product itself. So declarative configuration of the infrastructure, declarative configuration of the IAM products, and then run this with automation so that you always have we always have a consistent way to bring the product, the infrastructure necessary for the product, with the configuration that you want for your use cases to market repeatedly. We think it's very important in this context that we don't lose out or miss out on any of the use cases that are important, that are critical for a flexible IAM solution. So that means there's a large list of capabilities with regards to the access management, the identity management, and also how this works within your company. The options that each organization needs are different. Some people are very focused on very strong authentication methods. Others are focused on the user lifecycle, on the onboarding and offboarding process. Others are very focused on how their internal employees will be servicing their own customers. And all of those lead to situations where with an IDaaS implementation, you might not have the opportunity to have your customer service people be in the right role to help your users or your employees, whoever your end users are. You also may not have the same options for highly tailored authentication methods, and you may not have the options for different levels of authentication strength for internal employees versus external customers. And those are more complicated scenarios that we think are very critical for enterprises, and in those enterprise situations especially, we're not dealing with very straightforward or simple use cases. Our perspective is everything is code. Everything is code fits perfectly into the GitOps paradigm. The GitOps paradigm takes declarative configuration and applies it from a version controlled Git repository, so Git being the technology, but it's source control, and apply that declarative configuration to the implementation. In a simple sense, this means that you can start from zero with a cloud provider and apply your declarative configuration and have a running IAM system within tens of minutes. Let's say within 30 minutes, you can have your IAM product deployed with your configuration and ready to run. That might just be attractive from a disaster recovery point of view, but it's also very attractive from the point of view of bringing new features into your IAM implementation so that you can enable your business to now take advantage of these new features. It might be bring on a new federation with a new partner so that you can market a new opportunity to your users, or it could be that you want to change the configuration of your workflow for IAM provisioning, and therefore you want to be more efficient in an internal process. When everything is code, that means that it's super important to get that code from that repository deployed into the real world, into a cloud provider or into infrastructure, and get the software running repeatedly. So it's very important to have a good process. The continuous delivery process is therefore in our world of identity and access management, not usually focused on writing code itself, but writing configuration. So we start the process on the left-hand side with the people, and the people that have input into what the configuration needs to be. So that includes the customer or the client, with developers, if there needs to be add-ons or microservices, as Martin explained, that need to extend the identity and access management products. Expert configurators, so people that know how to configure the IAM products to make it do, to meet the use cases of the customer. And then, of course, auditors, security, everybody else who has an interest in how the identity and access management system is going to run once it gets out there and it's run. All of these opinions get codified and therefore put into source control, put into Git. From there may be things that are built, or there may be things that are organized or packaged so that they're ready to be deployed. Test them before you go. If there is a desire to have release control or a release manager involved, then that's the checkpoint of the workflow before deploying into a real environment. The great thing about this process is that we can start it at any point. We can add new features at any time. We now have control over which new things get into source control, and also we have control as to which new things, new features, new capabilities get rolled out into production. It's not an all or nothing decision. It's a process that's additive, and we can add new things over time. When anybody on the left-hand side, any of these people decide that there needs to be a change in security or a change in configuration or an update of the product, let's feed it into the left-hand side of the process. Let's run it through the packaging flow, test it before it goes, and then roll it out into a production environment. Something that we found very powerful is to package things the right way. And that means that a component-based approach to enable a service-oriented architecture. These terminologies are things that the software industry has embraced for a very long time, and it's something that makes a lot of sense. This fits perfectly into a microservices architecture. It's a question of how large are the components and how often do you want to deploy them. So from our perspective, creating components that have like concerns is important, and having those components bring everything they need for them to run is also important. When we look at a component, we don't simply look at the component from what is the purely functional things it needs to do. A component may also bring along with it the declaration of how it should be monitored. So not just how it runs, but also how do we monitor it. It can bring along with it how its logs should be output or where they should be output to, the reports necessary to get data out of the activity of that component. So all of those pieces come along with a component in our perspective. So each component can be one feature, could be rolled out this way, or it could be a component that has many features that are enabled or disabled based upon the preferences or use cases of a customer. Each one of the components runs through the system and gets packaged and deployed. And we can change components as we need to. This means that components can have different versions. Of course, there's the same situation as all microservices architectures, is that there's always the question of, are different component versions compatible with each other? This is a well-known problem in the microservices world, where having components that have compatible versions or compatible APIs is a critical factor of your testing matrix. It's a critical factor of your deployment. And the only question is, do you have the right process to manage it? So from our perspective, we run these things through the process of the pipeline and the deployment into modern architecture, modern technology. We use Kubernetes as our technology. Kubernetes nowadays is the orchestration software of choice for nearly all cloud providers. And it's a very common architecture choice or orchestration choice for on-premises implementations too. So we embrace Kubernetes as the modern data center architecture, and therefore take software that maybe isn't ready for Kubernetes, and we make it Kubernetes ready. Therefore, we have a standard way to bring these packaged solutions into a modern data center. Once we have a methodology and we have a technique for bringing this out in one place, we now have the opportunity to replicate this approach in as many regions as are necessary. And regions become necessary we've seen for primarily two reasons. One is for latency-based performance and making sure that people have good availability of their IAM components in different regions, and also have fast response for those IAM components for the login process, etc. The other thing is regulatory restrictions. So in many regions in the world, when we talk about identity data, we have a lot of restrictions about where that identity data can live and where it can move. And in that case, it makes sense to respect the law of the countries involved or the regions involved. And that means there are situations where you want to have a repeatable process, you want to have consistent functionality, but there are aspects in different regions where you may not be able to move identity data or user identifiable data between regions. And those are situations where we recognize that what's necessary here is a good approach that works in all the different regions, but also the flexibility to handle local authentication or local use of identity data for users, so that you don't trip across any of these multi-geography problems. The capability of having multiple geographies also leads to some side effects. Side effects include high availability and fully, real-time failover, and the ability to migrate from one region to another because all of the regions are the same. These capabilities, or these side effects of having this capability, is really great. It means that conversations about availability and disaster recovery are much easier conversations because it's already built into the system. So just for a moment about what we've created, we're in production with a number of different customers. We have the identity and access management products as the core to our offering. We wrap this with our methodology for build and deployment. We add some custom features along the way. I think anybody who has experience with identity and access management deployments has recognized that not everything you want is in the box with the product. That could be something as simple as the report that you want isn't available, or it could be more complicated regarding a feature that you need to create or an addition to the product that you need to add via a plugin or other method. These custom features are, it's important for us that those custom features get deployed and managed the same way as all the other components. So from our perspective, it's super important that they all follow the same flow. So everything follows the same GitOps flow, the same componentization flow, and those custom features are different components or plugins to the products that we've constructed a way to plug them into the product so that we keep the same product, we plug in the feature, and we deploy it using the same methodology. On the right-hand side, you see two other important aspects: the security aspect, which needs to be implemented at all steps along the process. Security is important from the very beginning as to which features you're going to choose. It's important during your testing phase and your deployment phases so that you have an eye on security at all aspects. So this has become popular, or popularly, the popular term for this is in the DevOps world is DevSecOps, to embed the security not just in the development flow or the operations or as a gate at the end, but make security part of the entire process for creation and deployment of your identity and access management system. And then finally, let's not just talk about the day one. It's implemented, you're live, and you're done. Let's talk about the monitoring and the operations of the ongoing system. And this is something that in traditional rollouts or traditional deployments of IAM, your IAM partner is involved during the first phase of get you live, and then after live, in many cases, they're done and they leave, and now you're left to operate the system that was built. And that day two questions then are up to you and up to your team to now develop. How do you monitor the system? How do you operate it day to day? How do you scale it? How do you ensure all your scenarios are going to work with regards to availability, your SLAs for that, and your disaster recovery scenarios. So we think that's an important aspect that also needs to be, let's say, shifted left and built in from the beginning. Let's not just build a component. Let's build a component that has a method of monitoring, a method of operations with regards to policy on scaling, policy on failover and backup. All of those should be aspects built in from the left, and they carry over to the right. And then your entire system is practical to operate and feasible to operate on an ongoing basis. We take all of these and we deploy them usually into a cloud provider or on premises for some of our customers. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this is on the Kubernetes platform. So whether that's, I have the three cloud providers, the three main cloud providers listed down below, AWS, Google, and Azure. And those cloud providers all have an offering for managed Kubernetes clusters. And we have some customers that run their own Kubernetes clusters, either with a partner or themselves. And that's just the technology for the data center. So to look at this a little bit differently, Kubernetes or OpenShift on either a bring your own cloud infrastructure. You provide the cloud provider and this type of deployment goes into it, or we do that for customers too. So we manage an entire cloud infrastructure, the cloud account, and everything for some of our customers. Or if you're already savvy in Kubernetes or OpenShift and you're managing that yourself, then that's the data center technology that we think makes a lot of sense. So we'll take the identity and access management solution and put that into your Kubernetes environment. Because of the nature of supporting a let's say, a standardized orchestration for the data center. That means that deploying in multiple regions is very attainable. It means that a multi-cloud strategy is not the same kind of problem it used to be in the past, or the same type of same level of effort. So it becomes very practical to deploy whatever your identity and access management solution needs to be, all the components that you need, or the different offerings from an IAM vendor, to deploy those into multiple regions or deploy them into different clouds at the same time. Those become very attainable when you're using a lot more standardization on the technology side. And after talking about technology this whole time and about the flow of building components and putting them into deployment, let's talk just a moment about the delivery model. It all comes down to people, and it all comes down to how are your teams involved during the, as we call, the initiation phase, and also during the managed service phase. So in the beginning, how are your teams involved with having their input into what is necessary for the identity and access management system, functional and non-functional requirements? We work with the teams very closely here. We have some customers that want to be extremely involved, so they are committing code, they're committing configuration to Git, which gets deployed. We have other customers that want to be less involved there. They want a service provided to them, as opposed to being part of the team of deploying the service or part of the team of getting this running. We find it very useful when customers are involved in the entire flow. That means that your teams are up to speed. That means they know how the platform works, and they know how to use the platform to make it do what they want, to make them able to achieve the use cases that you want to have deployed. And then after, let's say, the platform is running and now you're live with your initial use cases and your initial features, now the teams understand how to add new features, how to add new capabilities, and how to flow them through the platform and the process of deployment, and get them supported by your organization. So that has to do with not so much the operation of the platform, but it has to do with how do your help desks or customer service people interact with the platform with regards to do they have the right reports, do they have the right logs, do they have the right access into the systems to troubleshoot any issues, or to help users through let's say the end user flows or the login problems, things like that. So the people behind this are extremely important. It's not about replacing people with technology. It's about taking advantage of the technology so that people can be more effective in what they want to do. What we provide as a managed service is an IAM platform using best-of-breed products that's ready to run. We manage the release process, or we help a customer manage the release process. We also ensure that products get updated, new product releases are ready for the platform and ready to deploy. We ensure that everything that is deployed is managed from a security point of view. So this is an operational concern that is very critical, especially in IAM, where we don't want to have vulnerable versions or vulnerable components out in the wild. And so that's an important and ongoing process of keep things up to date from a security point of view, but also keep things up to date from a functionality point of view. We provide as much customer access or as much access to the running systems as you want or as a customer wants. So with an identity as a service offering, many times you don't have the access to the back end, the direct access to what's happening on the machines or on the servers or whatever you'd like to call the virtual components that are out there in your cloud provider. But that's something that is very important for some customers, to get under the hood, to see what's happening on the inside of the identity and access management system, to really get their hands dirty if they want to, or keep their hands clean and have it be somebody else's system to manage. From a tool chain perspective, we really focus on using new and modern technology. We think that that's extremely important. It keeps us up to date from a skills perspective. It also keeps methodologies fresh. And it also means that overall, we're never satisfied with what we're using. We see that the tools we're using today are the appropriate tools for today, and new tools come out that might be more appropriate tomorrow. And the biggest thing about our systems is that, or that the platform that we've put together, is that the platform is continually changing and evolving. And this is a perspective that not every customer is willing to, or is happy to internalize. But it's super important to recognize that there is a consistent rate of change that should happen in your implementations and in your identity and access management and in your normal IT operations. Embracing that change and taking advantage of the new technologies, new approaches that come out, we find is very important. Having a very collaborative approach to running the entire platform. Customers have great ideas, we have great ideas, the industry has great ideas. Let's continue to use the best of those ideas, tie them together in a cohesive platform that enables what we want here. And what we want is just to support the business. When the business says, I want to have a new functionality for my customers, I want to roll out a new web store, I want to, we're in the middle of a pandemic, I suddenly have a need for everybody to work remotely. How does IAM support those business drivers, and how can it respond quickly? And having a methodology that change is consistent and change always happens, and change for the better or improvements are always necessary, really helps enable the whole platform, the whole tool chains, the whole pipeline to be responsive. And then the last two things on the bottom here are with regards to let's make sure we're doing a good job. So let's not just do what we think is good, but let's also measure what we're doing and ensure that we're meeting the measurements and the expectations for ourselves and also for our customers. And with regards to let's have the right reports in place, and if we don't have them, let's create them. Let's make them part of the platform. Let's not create custom reports for every single customer. Let's create reports that can be reused or that are very important for everybody. And of course, that doesn't mean don't create custom reports or don't create custom functionality. It means that whenever there's an opportunity to generalize functionality and have many opinions go into a stronger core capability, we take advantage of that. And then with regards to availability, we measure ourselves on a 99.95% availability, and this is based on the 5 nines capability of the cloud providers, or 4 nines of the cloud providers. And once we have multiple layers of that, there's no way to meet a 100% availability, but we do pretty well, and we're really happy with the ability that we have to keep our systems running all the time, have them always be available for hundreds of thousands of employees logging in every day, or for millions of consumers on the internet logging in every day. That is something we're really pleased with, and we have a good track record with. So thanks very much for listening. I hope this has given you some ideas of how it can be done. So a lot of the things that Martin talked about earlier, these are not just approaches that can't be achieved. We achieve them today. We achieve them with customers in production who have many happy users, and the customers are very happy. Visit our website and see who those customers are, and we're really glad that we've been able to achieve some of the goals that it seems like Martin puts out goals and he says, well, this is the thing that you should look for, and we look at that and say, well, that's a great thing to strive for, and we hope that we've achieved some of it with the offering we've put into place over the last few years.
Thank you, Tim, and very, very insightful talk. Yes, our job as analysts is to raise the bar, isn't it? But also to give guidance on where to go from where you are today as a customer, and I think it's really we are in a transition phase of identity and access management, and I think there will be a lot of other things, more policies, broader perspectives. So this will be very interesting over the next couple of years. And so it's really time to step back and look at what is my future perspective on identity management. So
yeah, I think
let's go to the Q&A part.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Martin, just on that comment, I was going to say that I find it interesting today that we talk less about particular features of identity and access management, and we talk more about how do you get it running and how do you manage it over time, because it's more the ongoing concern of IAM is interesting or important than the do we have certificate authentication, right? Those very point-specific features.
And I think that's an important point. You know, I'm talking as an analyst before that in a former life, so to speak, as a journalist to vendors for 30 years or so. And one of the important learnings I had is that adding a feature is relatively easy. Changing the architecture, if you did it wrong, that is the big challenge. And I think it's, you know, when you make a plan, when you have a good blueprint, then you can do a lot of things within that. And this is, I think, it's so essential to really start with the planning, because every dollar or euro you spend for a good planning and creating a model and selecting the right technology pays off multiple times. And it goes wrong if you do it the other way around, if you just start with a tool. So we have very little time left. I think you already answered some of the questions we have here, like how to deal with product updates, and also you talked about the organization. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have a quick look at the results of the first poll we had. And maybe we can display these because I found them quite interesting. What you're seeing here is really that roughly 4 out of 5 still are relying on traditional identity and access management architectures compared to modern microservice container-based deployments. And I think this shows quite well the current situation. It doesn't mean that you need to change immediately over the next time. But when you look at updates, when you look at new investments, then you should think about what is, as we just discussed, what is the right architecture to do so. And maybe we also can go directly to the second poll.
Well, I think this result here is interesting because to me, it really shows that we as an industry, we as the customers need to put more pressure on the traditional vendors to move to new approaches because the industry sees that microservices have a great opportunity, and it's really, I think, difficult from a vendor perspective when you have a monolithic product. It's hard to decide how to break that apart because you don't want to sacrifice the reliability you've given to your customers for years. So
you benefit as a vendor. I think that's true, and it's interesting. I think at our ASD probably 3 years ago or so, when I did my first talk about microservice and identity management, right after a couple of vendors approached me and said, "Oh, what does it mean to me?" And so I would dare to say it's not that much about pressure on vendors, because I believe probably all vendors have understood it well, but it's a journey to move from a traditional product to a modern solution. So for the other poll, I think we have also an interesting split. We have relatively few which are pure IDaaS already, and then we have sort of half of the rest that is still only on premises, and the others which have some parts. I would assume that mostly it's more the access management piece and authentication pieces, which are then IDaaS already. So again, it's a journey, but I think it's also important to understand this is a journey, and I think we can remove the results here, and then I think that is the situation.
My take on that, the results there, makes sense. I think the choice for many people is somewhere in the middle of IDaaS versus whatever the alternative is, and the alternative seems to be IDaaS versus on-premises, and those are two extremes of a balance between where are you comfortable putting the data, where are you comfortable operating whatever it is that you've chosen, and what are your opportunities for operating your software in either yourself or via somebody else, or in a cloud, or off the shelf from an IDaaS provider. It's a real good.
Okay, unfortunately, we are already out of time. Thank you very much. Tim, thank you to all the attendees for listening to this KuppingerCole webinar. Hope to see some of you on site in Munich next week, or at least in the online and live transmission of the event, where you also can participate in all the conversations. So don't miss that event, and talk to you soon again. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, everybody.